Stanford University.
This presentation is delivered by the Stanford Center for Professional Development.
Great. So we're going to get started. This class is Patent Law and Strategy for Entrepreneurs and Innovators. It's listed in the Mechanical Engineering Department, ME 208. Also listed in MSc 278. It doesn't have anything to do with any particular type of technology. It is listed under ME first, but you could be a EE, a CS. It doesn't matter what kind of technology you're bringing to the table. It's set up as 2 or 3 credits. Honestly, to me, it's the same thing. It's the same class. I'm going to be grading you all the same. I'm going to be asking the same thing. But I've heard from students in the past, it'd be great to have it sign up for just 2 instead of 3, because that fits the schedule a little bit better. Great. But just so you know, it's the same class, regardless of how many credits you actually sign up for. We're here. Great. We're starting a little bit late today, but and obviously it's not in Meyer Forum. It's here in Thornton 102. I'm Jeff Abhinav. This is my TA. Also have a couple other TAs, Philip, and another one, Catherine, who's not actually going to be attending class. This is the book. Does anyone have this? Or the other version, the black and gray one? I sold like 60 copies this month. I'm sure it wasn't just random people. Okay. Okay. So you could download chapter 1 and chapter 2 from coursework, and you could also get, if you got the old version, you could download chapters 4 and 5. And so you're effectively going to be just fine, whether you're downloading the first 2 chapters and reading this whenever you get it, or downloading chapters 4 and 5 and supplementing the old edition. This is the new edition that was changed to reflect some of the new laws that are coming into that start in March of 2013. It's a quick background about who I am and why I'm here in front of you guys. So I'm a patent attorney. I wrote my first patent application 15 years ago. I've written 500 since then. Represent companies like Twilio and Tactus and Mission Motors. Also represent Facebook with their patent prosecution work. I'm an educator. I've taught 18 courses. I started off at the University of Michigan in the engineering school over there, teaching essentially this class. When I moved to California about 8 years ago, I started teaching here. I've taught this class 6 or 7 times. I also teach another version of this, or kind of an advanced version of this class in the law school, and that's Law 321. That's cross-listed in the ME department as ME 278. And so typically some of my top students from this class take that particular class, the law school class, and some of those students end up working with me at my law firm. I'm an angel investor. Was actually the first investor in Twilio, the first one in Tactus, the first one in Mission Motors. I made another dozen or so investments. You could find me on AngelList. And what that also does, and in addition to the patent application work that I do, I work solely with startups. And how do you get attracted? How do you find investor money? And how do you become attractive to them? And because of my angel investing experience, I actually know what other angels are looking for. And so that's kind of what I bring back to the strategy of startups. I started my own firm 10 years ago. I was just based right out of my living room. I think we made, 100 grand or so that year. This year we'll clear over 2 million. We have a staff of about 10, about 4 patent agents, all with Stanford degrees, that I met through here. And my background in engineering is both mechanical undergrad and electrical grad work, both from the University of Michigan. I'll talk a little bit about what we're going to accomplish here in this class. The inventors have these 4 concerns. And how do you protect your inventions in the early stages? How do you know if this thing is actually going to be patentable? Is it worth filing a patent application on? And if we do move forward with this particular product, are we going to infringe someone else's patent? Is this something that our particular company is liable for? Are patent trolls going to come after us? Or a competitor going to come after us? Are we going to be sued? And then when we understand all of that, one of the later lectures will cover what do we actually do with this? How do we license this, or how do we build on this, or how do we value this? How do we pitch this to investors as something that's worth a couple $1 million? We're going to learn, this is a very tactical class. I'm not going to teach you something just because it's theory or history. We'll cover both of those topics very, very quickly today, and then quickly move on. You'll learn how to actually capture your invention and how to do a patentability analysis. This will be working with the database of the Patent Office. It's a little painful. It's a little slow, but I'll teach you some of the tricks in actually interacting with that particular database. We're going to write our own provisional application. That's one of the assignments of the class. And so if you have an invention, or your friend has an invention, or your teammates, or co-founder, or uncle, or sister has an invention, fantastic. I highly encourage you to be able to bring that to the class. That's going to make your class experience much more enlightening, because you actually have something that you're going to bring, or that you're going to work on, that you know and you care about. If you don't have an invention, and you don't have someone that kind of falls in those categories of being an inventor, that you actually want to work on something, that's fine. I'll hook you up with someone here, whether that's through the product design group, or the biodesign group, or other groups that I'm kind of associated here on campus. We're going to learn how to avoid patent infringement, and how to design around other people's patents, and to make sure that if a company that you start stays out of trouble. We'll talk a little bit about licensing, not a whole lot, but we'll definitely talk about scaling your patent portfolio from the very early days of a company to an acquisition, which is exactly what I have experience with. We're not going to cover writing claims. This is not something I could cover in this class. That's an entire other class. That is the class that I teach in the law school. Luckily, provisional applications don't need claims, so we're fine. This is how the grading is going to break out. Participation is a big deal in this class. There's going to be 2 assignments, and then since a good portion of you will ask for extra credit, I've just made that official. There's an official extra credit project. This is somewhat new from last year. Some of you are actually enrolled in a credit, no credit type of arrangement. We have a record number of students in the class, and so to keep this manageable, I'm not actually going to provide comments to those that are assigned up for credit, no credit in this class. You'll get a grade, a credit or no credit, but you're not going to get comments. The participation breaks down into 2 different components: everyone who's here in the class, on-campus folks, and then off-campus folks. The on-campus folks, I call on someone, typically 3 or 4 folks every single lecture. And that's something where I'm going to put you there on the spot. I'm going to call out your name, and this is the Socratic method that's used in law school. And I'm going to ask you a question. And if you have a great answer, fantastic. If you have an okay answer, that's still pretty good. I understand that putting you on the spot is difficult. If you have 0 answer, then that's bad. But what's even worse than that is that you're not here. If you're not going to be here, tell me. It's really easy. Hey, professor, I'm not going to be here. And make sure you tell me before 12 noon, and I'll get on a particular list to make sure that I don't call on you for the day. Again, make sure that you tell me if you're not going to be here. For the, this is an error, sorry, that should be off-campus students. For the off-campus students, obviously I can't call on you. And so what I need you to do is to provide thought-provoking questions, comprehensive questions that prove that you've actually read the material, and provide that to the TA the night before the class. Some of those questions will find their way into the lecture, some of them will not. So don't expect me to actually answer every single one of those. That's really just there to make sure that you're reading. The lowest grade on that will be dropped. Is there any questions on the participation portion of this? The assignments. I ask that you actually get my approval before you do the assignment, and that's because sometimes things are too easy, and I can't tell if you actually know what you're doing, and some things are way too hard, and you're not going to get far enough. And so I want you to be able to pick a topic, pick an invention that's actually going to make a good assignment, and that's actually the only reason that I ask that you actually get it approved by me. If you don't get that approval, and you pick a bad topic, and you get a bad grade, there's really not much I could do about that. So it's really just for you. We're going to do the patentability search and a provisional application. There's a really important aspect here that's I want you to use the invention that you're excited about. There's nothing about this class that's going to change the ownership of that or any licensing rights or anything like that. This is Stanford, but OTL doesn't have any rights just because you bring an invention to this particular class. This isn't considered using resources. And so if you have your own invention and you bring it to this class and you write a provisional application on that, that doesn't change who owns it. I want to make sure that that's crystal clear. Because I really want you to use your best invention here. Like, this is what the class is about.
Is there anything to sign, like non-disclosure?
Yeah, so I have that as kind of like part of the syllabus. I'm an attorney. There's a bunch of ethical obligations that I have just in terms of reading confidential information. And so you're protected in terms of all of that. If you wanted to work and share your particular invention, because it has a couple of different things that might actually be patentable, great. I could pair you up with a couple of their folks, and now all of a sudden your team could have 3 or 4 patent provisional applications being filed. You could be writing on the same exact invention as someone else, but there is no collaborative aspect of this particular class. These assignments are individual. Each one is about, say, 10 pages or so in writing. We'll be talking about these in great detail over the course. This is just a brief overview on what we're going to cover. I'm going to talk just at a high level about intellectual property today and how the patent system works. Next Friday, when is it invention and how do we capture that? On the Friday after that. Is the invention patentable? Does it meet the requirements? Does this invention, if we were to actually make it and use it and sell it, does it infringe any other patents? There's going to be a week in November that we're not going to have class. I may find a guest lecturer for that class, but essentially I'm not going to be here, and I know that for sure right now. November 16th is one of the most important lectures of the entire class. It kind of brings everything up, brings everything together in terms of what do you know about patentability and what do you know about infringement. Who owns a patent application and licensing and ownership? The rules are actually changing this year, so that's actually a pretty interesting topic. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of strategy. I'm going to fill in strategy along the way, but we'll have a whole entire lecture dedicated to that. Is there any questions before we actually jump into the substance for today?
If we have to miss class for any particular reason, will we have access to these online videos?
Yes, but it doesn't actually absolve you from, or it doesn't turn you into an on-campus student to an off-campus student. And so that's going to be considered one of your absences if you actually do that. The participation is, I want you to be here. But yes, if you use your one absence and say, hey, I'm not here, I highly encourage you to find the video.
What is the ramification of missing more than one class?
So you're risking being called. And if you get called on and you're not here, that's a 0 for participation. Anything else before we start? Okay. And we're going to cover just 3 fairly simple topics. What is intellectual property? How do societies, or why do they provide these rights? And how can you actually leverage these? I think I have an example here. It's an old one. It's not the fancy one that's up there. I'm sure you've all seen this. This is a coffee cup sleeve, Starbucks coffee cup sleeve. I want you to get into small groups. The person to your left and right, make little groups of 3 or 4, or possibly even 2. I want you to come up with a list of the intellectual property rights that could cover this thing right here that I'm holding in my hands, a coffee cup sleeve that fits a a warm coffee cup that fits in between here. My quick tip to you guys, it's more than one. All right. Coffee cup sleeve. What do you guys think? Name one intellectual property right that you could have or pursue if you come up with a coffee cup sleeve?
Maybe a technique for sealing the edges.
Sure. So maybe there's a method here before either cutting and then folding and then sealing. Great. What kind of intellectual property right might that be? So it's a method, sure. So we have 4 or 5 categories of intellectual property rights. What might that fall into?
I'm not sure.
Anyone else?
Trade secret.
It could be, but I think you're actually thinking of a utility patent. Sure. So patents are one of the things, that's actually what this whole class is all about. And so a utility patent is a type of patent, and a method is one of the types of things that can be protected under a utility patent. Awesome. That's one. What about you guys?
Well, we decided that the symbol is probably a trademark.
Sure.
Starbucks, so
That's usually where we start. So I mean, that's what you can see, right?
Right.
What does this do? What does that say to you?
Well, it says that it's associated with some idea of quality, origin, a hope for good taste, maybe. Or
Sure. So personally, what does this mean to you? If I'm drinking this cup of coffee, what does this mean?
that it's from Starbucks.
Sure, but what does it say about the coffee that's in here?
You know, I'm not a coffee
So you don't like it. So there's nothing there for you. But it's overpriced and it has funny names. Great. So what does it mean to you? Is there anything else? No. Just on the coffee, on Starbucks, because this means different things to different people. What does it mean to you? I'm drinking this. What do you know about this coffee? I'm going to hand it to you. What do you expect
I have
about
my
it?
favorite drink, my favorite latte.
Okay, so it may or may not be that, right? Great. If it is that, what does it bring to you?
Happiness.
Great. Awesome. So who else? What does it mean to you?
Whatever is associated with the Starbucks brand.
No, but what do you associate?
Like premium
Premium
coffee.
Great, premium coffee. Great, that's what you associate with it. And so that's what we do. And this is actually what this is for. That this particular mark is for us. Is that you know something about this cup of coffee that I'm drinking, even though you actually haven't tasted it yet. I could say, we're going to pour, do you want some coffee? And I hand this to you, and you know what this coffee is like, if you're a coffee drinker. You know what this coffee is like. You know what it tastes like, you know how hot it is, you know what it smells like. You probably have an idea of how much I paid for it, all of those things. If you saw this on a particular cafe, you probably know something about that, the interior, what it's going to feel like, what it's going to sound like, the people that are going to be there. You know something about it through this thing right here, the symbol. And this symbol is working overtime to make sure that you get this shortcut, that you already know what's there. I'm going to buy a used car, and I go to a used car lot, and there's a bunch of symbols on the hoods. And there's one of them that's got this propeller thing, right? It's blue and white and blue and white. Like, what do I know about the engine of that car? It's German. What does that mean? What does it mean to you? It means quality engineering, sure. What else? What else do we know about the little propeller car?
It's going to be expensive to fix.
It's going to be expensive to fix. Okay, you know that, and yet you haven't even looked at it. You haven't looked under the hood, and yet you know that. These things actually, so they carry positive qualities and they carry negative qualities. These are associations. So I know something about that car, and yet I haven't actually had a mechanic take a look at that. I haven't torn apart the engine and checked out all the tolerances to figure out, is it going to be expensive to fix and is it going to break down? I haven't looked at all the supply chains for all of the repair people. All I saw was this little symbol that was maybe 2 inches in diameter. And yet we know all of these things already. That's what trademarks do. They actually are for us, consumers. So say you go into a cafe, you order up, you think it's you walk there, you see the siren. This isn't a mermaid, it's a siren. I was corrected by a Starbucks executive once. That the siren, you thought you saw her, and you walk in there, and you order something, and you get the coffee, and it's cold, and it's really weak, and it smells bad. And you're like, this is not what I paid for. I don't understand this at all. And you're confused because the green, now you're taking a little bit closer look, and it's actually like a seahorse instead of a siren. And it doesn't say Starbucks on it, it says Starlux. And you go outside and you look a little bit closer and the green's off, and yeah, sure enough, it's a seahorse, and it says Starlux. What just happened? Duped. Exactly. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about the fact that you just got duped?
Make angry comments about the business on the internet.
We could do something now, right? What could you do 10 years ago?
Sue them.
Sue them. Yeah. That was $3.95. I got duped. How much do you think that lawyer's going to cost?
Class action.
Yeah, my guess is that you're not going to get very far before you run out of that $3.95 with the attorney. And so the short is that you're not going to sue. And we know that. We know that as a society that you're not going to sue. And so what we do is we actually empower Starbucks to sue on our behalf. That if there's a company out there that's duping us, in some way it's kind of duping Starbucks too. They're trading off of that name. And so what we do is we empower Starbucks to go out and enforce their rights as their trademark rights against other people that are confusing others in the marketplace. And that right there is exactly how trademark law works and why it works. Who here is a dog or a cat? You walk into Petco, and one of the cat foods is Cadillac. What do you associate with Cadillac cat food? Do you? Do you think that actually General Motors made that cat food? No. Why not? Because it really doesn't have anything to do with cars, does it? That's actually a really important part about trademark law, is that we're not actually extracting this word from our vernacular. Apple does a good job of trying to take that word, and Google does a great job of taking that word, just out of our vernacular. But we could still use it. I could still create a perfectly legit, perfectly lawful sentence with the word Apple in it and not have any trademark infringement. In fact, I could probably come up with a company and call it Apple and not have any trademark infringement. Maybe it's astronaut suits. You wouldn't confuse it with Apple. Maybe you would if they were white. I don't know. But the Cadillac cat food, you wouldn't confuse it. And this is really important, that the more creative the word is, the more kind of space you have, the more that you could call it your own. The more generic the word, then you're going to be kind of focused in on that particular type of industry. You come up with a word like Kodak, and you could pretty much own that word. A more generic word like Cadillac or Apple, you're probably going to have to share that, but you're going to have rights within that particular space.
So what if Cadillac decided to produce cat food? They wouldn't be allowed to use their own name to do that? Or?
It gets a little bit confusing.
Because BMW makes bikes, for example, right? Not many, but they do.
Really make them, but they do brand. They do brand, right? And so some of the car manufacturers, but then you might see it's got wheels, it's got something to steer, it's got brakes, it's kind of like a bike. And so I could see, moving into that space. I like the Cadillac example because cat food and cars, pretty far apart. But this gets a lot more confusing, and you could see how the law side of it sneaks in, where it's all right, well, this is close. This is donuts and coffee. You were a donut shop, and now you're selling coffee, and now you're selling coffee in a grocery store. That could how much expansion are we actually going to allow that particular company? And if a larger company comes in, there's actually this weird aspect that you could have reverse trademark confusion, that we're going to actually start stealing away from the smaller guy that was there first. But if a larger company goes in there second, they may eventually be able to establish themselves. Whole Foods has done that a couple of times. Any other questions on trademark law? This might be the last time I talk about trademark law this quarter. Okay. That's the second intellectual property right. So we have a utility patent on the method of folding and adhering. We have a trademark on this symbol right here. What about the group in the back? You guys right there.
Was that the corrugation on the cardboard?
What kind of intellectual property might cover the corrugation of the cardboard?
I don't know what's it called, like the technical patent.
Yes, it's a utility patent.
Okay.
Yeah. And so there may be a system or a device utility patent based on how this corrugation works. And maybe it has something to do with the height of the corrugation, maybe it has something to do with the thickness or something along those lines. I'd have a hard time believing that was the first time that man's ever done that, but maybe that's quite possible that you could get that. Great, yeah.
Why would the corrugated part of that holder be a utility patent and not a design patent?
So it could be, but I don't necessarily see the aesthetics of this. But there is a design patent here. Where do you think that might be? So a design patent is in the aesthetic aspect of this, not the functional aspect. Where is the design aspect?
The logo is centered or...
I think it's a little long. It's that little arch, right?
But
why is that there? Why is this little arch right here?
To accentuate the circle logo?
Sure, it's just for purely aesthetic reasons, right? And so this is an aesthetic choice. And this aesthetic choice right here is a perfect example of something that you could go after with a design patent. Yes?
I have a question.
So if someone else had a circular logo and it was a different company that wanted to make those protectors, the insulators,
Yep.
would they not be able to use that arch over their circular logo?
So if you got a design patent on that, then it's correct. So if you got a sleeve that had this little arch right there and the front part of this, centered in kind of the front part of the sleeve, then yeah, you'd be able to protect that. As like, that's my design patent. Design patents are a little bit limited in the sense that they run out after 14 years, but 14 years is a long time. And for 14 years, you'd be able to have that as yours. I'm not saying that you could actually get that, but that would be something that you could at least think of and at least pursue.
To piggyback off that question, I've only seen 2 types of coffee holders in my existence, I guess. One is just straight and one's the Starbucks with curve. Would it actually be possible to license out that design to like another company? Is that actually worth it?
My guess is that Starbucks doesn't actually own this, that they didn't actually come up with this. But someone else did, and they're licensing that to Starbucks, or they're making it for Starbucks. So that's a weird way of answering yes. Yeah.
So if I were to patent that little semicircle like that,
what would I be owning? Would I be owning like the outline of the semicircle just for that, like that particular?
You don't really own the. If this was pure blank, that's what you would own.
So it's the whole entire shape of the whole thing, not just the semicircle.
Sorry, one question about the trademark. Is there a copyright associated with that trademark? Because some artists
we'll talk about
that.
copyright in a second.
Okay.
We'll definitely get that. So design patents. We're not actually going to talk about design patents for the rest of the quarter. Yeah.
Does it cover in the design pattern as well?
What's that?
The specific height of the band.
The height of the band. Sure. So you might argue that that's part of the utility of that, right? So you need to be able to get it. I could barely get 4 fingers around that. But it's got some kind of utility here. You know, if it was really short, then it's not going to really work all that well. And if it was super long, then that's just another second cup. And so my hunch there is that it would be very difficult to separate the aesthetic aspect from the functional aspect. It's a great question, because that area of law gets pretty tricky. I'll bring this up right now, but I'll bring it up multiple times throughout the quarter. What was just asked was a very legal question. We're all engineers and scientists in this room, including myself. And so this is something where we like to think in black and white, that there's an answer there. Oh, is that going to be something, is that functional or is that an aesthetic choice? And the reality is like this is just something that you could argue. One could argue that that particular height there is just a design aspect, that there's some kind of golden ratio here of like that height. And that height is actually beautiful and that's part of the design. And someone else could argue that, well, that's utility. That's just like the average of 4 or 3 fingers tall. And this aspect right here is the law. And that's what a big part of this class is going to be, is like teaching you that there is no one answer to this. But to understand like the most likely what the right answer or the one that's going to be winning answer is all about. What else? Yeah.
What about when you have different patents coming in
From different sources. For example, we brought up the corrugated cardboard.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely hit on that in like
Okay.
the entire lecture. So let's spend a little bit of time, like what else, intellectual property rights for this? Yeah. Copyright. Tell me a little bit about how the copyright might work.
Well, if I had to guess, there's a certain layout of information, at least with all the boxes on the back.
Awesome.
That's very useful, and they probably came up with it first.
Yes, exactly right. So there's something here, the way that they talked about it, the way that they have these boxes, the way they arrange it, that could be the subject matter of a copyright.
Wouldn't the fact that there are boxes be a utility patent though?
No, there's nothing particularly useful about just printed matter. And so the patent office has said anything that's just kind of printed matter or forms or things like that isn't going to fall into a utility patent.
Interesting. So even if it's like a way to distinguish between coffee and tea that is imprinted on this thing, it doesn't matter, it's copyright.
I could see making an argument there, but this exact box on this thing is going to be considered printed matter. But I think that there's like a process there of like, well, how do we, within the process of making a drink, how do we quickly associate this is the right drink, or how do I quickly get to that information? there may be some kind of business method type of utility patent that's there. But it's not going to be on this square. It's copyright. I don't know if you can see it from here. It's not in that version. But in this version that I'm holding in my hand, there's kind of these cocoa leaves in the back. That might be the subject matter of a copyright. The choice of wording might be the subject matter of a copyright. I want you to think of the word copyright for a second. Copyright. It's actually the right to copy. Like, that's what a copyright is. Do you have the right to copy? In today's age, it's really easy to make a copy. You just take a supercomputer out of your pocket, and you snap a photo, and one click, and so you distribute it to 1,000 people. When they came up with copyright laws, like, that would have just exploded the brains out of all of those folks that were actually coming up with copyright laws. That would literally, within 5 seconds, you could distribute something in an identical form to 1,000 people, or more, depending on how many friends you have on Facebook. I want to talk a little bit about actually producing a copy, or producing some artistic work. And so when we were walking over here, we passed a fountain, and the fountain was spraying some water, and that was really pretty, and it was kind of tranquil. I want to copyright in that particular drawing that I just made. It's not particularly great. It's not particularly artistic. I'm not going to win any prizes. No one's going to buy it. But I have a copyright in that thing right there. And when you start to take something of some kind of original form, whether that's typically art forms, sculpture, choreography, writing, text, poems, paintings, those types of things, and you put them in some kind of tangible form. It's recorded, it's drawn, it's actually there on a board. Like, that's actually, automatically, you have a copyright in that. What if someone else, completely unrelated to me, completely unrelated to this class, not any of the off-campus students, someone, say, in Washington, D.C., comes up with that same exact drawing and posts it on the web? Can I sue them? Why can't I sue them? It was independent creation. They didn't copy it. And that was a really important part of the word copyright. They didn't copy it. They came up with it on their own. Mark Rothko, great abstraction painter. Big swatches of just big paint, orange and blues and reds. Really simple stuff. Someone else on the other side of the world comes up with something identical to his paintings, now worth millions and millions of dollars. Was there a copyright infringement there? No. If there wasn't any copying, there's no copyright infringement. That's an incredibly important aspect.
But if I now draw what you just drew on the board.
Questions? Raise your hands, please.
Sorry. If I now draw what you've drawn there here,
Yep.
with, like, after it, but not taking a picture.
You're interpreting that, right? So
Yeah.
if you interpret that particular photo and you put it in your notes, most likely that's fine. But we don't have to interpret anymore. You just take out this thing out of your pocket and you snap a photo, and now you have an identical version of this. And you could easily distribute this to thousands and 10,000s of people. That's actually where copyright law gets a little tricky. You could pull out the supercomputer from your pocket and put it on the desk and record my voice, and then distribute that. And there's easy platforms to do that. And that's actually, so those are copyrights, copyright infringements every single time that happens. This photo right here used to be the one of the Starbucks coffee cup sleeve. I used to just, this presentation that I gave in the past, I would just take this from the internet. Because I could. Because it was faster than actually taking my own photograph. Because it is. I mean, it only took me like 5 seconds to find it in Google Images. Like, there it is, and I just tossed it in the presentation. And here I am, an intellectual property attorney, and I took that from the web. This class, I'm teaching an online component. Eventually, this class is going to be listed in Creative Commons. There's maybe 100, maybe 1,000 people that might look at this exact lecture. And that's problematic if I stole some other image. And so in the scrappy days, I took the photo from Google. I took it from some other photographer. And now the prime time days, I put in my own photograph. That's just a really important lesson that I hope you take away from copyright law. That it's easy to copy. And there's going to be some times where you do it, because that's the easiest thing to do, and the liability there is low. I'm sharing it with a bunch of people, 50 people in a class. But now when this thing gets potentially distributed to thousands of people, then that liability just opens up dramatically. And I don't want to be liable for that. Neither do you. And so change the image. Make sure that you have those rights.
It by just giving credit, right? Saying
No.
No?
No.
Why not?
Because there is no exception in copyright law for, oh, I gave them credit. I stole it, but I said who I stole it from. There is actually no exception for that.
So if there's like a copyright, say, on that logo, and you've taken a picture of it, so even though you took the picture...
So that's the picture of the logo. So Starbucks knows and hopes that that logo will be out there in the world, and they hope that that's going to be the subject matter of a photo. And that's not actually infringement. That trademark, you don't think that that photo comes from Starbucks just because there's a Starbucks logo in that photo. Let's not confuse copyright law and trademark law. But LA and Hollywood in general, they have people that scour through an entire movie to make sure that there isn't any art in the background. And if there is art in the background of any of the scenes, they make sure that they go in and get those rights, or they delete those scenes. Yeah.
Like, if I were to make an interpretation of the drawing you just made on the board, where would that fit forgeries into like the world of copyright?
Forgeries are trying to get a lot more like copies than interpretations, right?
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So what about, I know for like educational use, there are some...
So there's some fair use exceptions, but the exception is actually a defense. So there is an infringement first, and then you're saying, well, I'm not liable because I have this defense of fair use. But there is an infringement first. Would I be able to get away with it here? Maybe. If this is now on the web and I'm not necessarily in an educational component, then I don't think so. If I posted a snippet of this on my website, definitely not. Yeah.
What about the other way around? If I put pictures on the web and I want people to use them in their classes, what should I put that says that I'm relieving all copyright?
So a great way of doing this is Creative Commons. Creative Commons, born right here, Lawrence Lessig, brilliant minds, and copyright law, of the concept of let's make licensing copyrights really easy. Put a symbol on it, and this symbol is attached to a license and an agreement that we all agree to by just putting this symbol, the little CC or the little dollar sign with a slash through it. There's a bunch of things that I would recommend looking up Creative Commons. Yeah.
You mentioned independent creation earlier. If you trademark something and then someone comes up with the same thing independently,
So trademark law doesn't have independent creation exceptions. Copyright does. Yeah.
I thought it was when you talk about the artist and the independent creation, the opposite ocean or opposite planet. What if when the global artist selling, his paintings are worth millions of dollars, and the other paintings suddenly their value shoots up as well? Would that be considered trademark infringement?
Trademark with famous people, famous movies, like those things start to get a little bit confusing. Can you borrow someone's style? And is that style a trademark? There's some laws around that, and some different countries have different laws around that. You're essentially trying to steal and trade off someone else's artistic style. That's kind of beyond this class. It doesn't necessarily fit well into any of these categories. Yeah.
Who in the end is responsible for proving that there was independence? So if I make the
It depends, I'll shortcut to that answer. It depends on how close it is. If it looks ridiculously close, then it's going to flip through to the defendant to say that it was an independent creation. And if it doesn't look all that close, it's going to stay on the plaintiff to say that they had access, then this is a copy. Music. Well, as long as I record only 7 seconds or less, then I'm okay, right? Have you guys heard that? It's completely false. It's still copyright infringement. Well, if I only take one page out of the book and photocopy it, that's okay, right? It's copyright infringement. Make sure it's so easy to infringe copyrights right now. Just so incredibly easy to do that. It's not only easy to do it once by getting it into your network, it's also just incredibly easy to infringe 10,000 times by putting it on some social network. The liability there is enormous. Understand what you're doing and understanding what that liability is.
How much suing is actually going on? I mean, you're sort of warning us not to infringe, but does it happen? Do people go on Facebook and say, wow, I sue this person because he infringed 10,000?
So if I say Obama's, that particular image of when he was running 4 years ago, can you picture the Shepard Fairey's image? Right. He was sued, Shepard Fairey was sued, because he actually based that painting off of a photograph from the AP, Associated Press. So that's kind of like the most famous copyright infringement that I could throw out there. I think they eventually settled, but I think a decent amount of money exchanged hands. Yeah.
So how does it work, like when people are always doing covers of songs on YouTube, or maybe they make some sort of video about a company or startup that they're doing and they use some song in the background. It's not on TV, but it's on kind of this wide social
I'd say it's
media.
way worse, the fact that it's on
Okay.
it's on YouTube. And so that doesn't, television, tech, it's gone after the show's over. But YouTube sticks around forever. And that thing could collect millions and millions of watches or views. And so I don't think that it's just on YouTube, that's okay, right? No. And I think that that's where, it's a family picnic and you want to throw some song in the background, great, do it. What's the reality? What's the chances that that thing is going to go viral? If it does, you probably should change the background music.
So if something goes viral that has a song that's famous or something like that, then the people who made that can be sued?
Yeah.
Okay, even if it's just like an individual who does like a cover of a song?
That's what I'm saying. So there's some quirks about music and the copyright law that we're not going to get too much further into depth. But if the artist has licensed a cover to someone else before, then they have other artists can cover that particular song. And so that's kind of why some songs just have never been covered and other songs have been covered 20 times. And the second and third and fourth and beyond that artists to cover the song pay a rate that's based on the fact that there's already some kind of rate established for that. Last question on copyright law.
So if you're performing a cover song and not necessarily recording or distributing it, are you still infringing on the copyright?
Yes,
even if it's for your own consumption.
Yeah, yes, but it's different. You could have certain rights to cover songs. Music's a little bit strange in the sense that there's an underlying music, the actual notes, and the sound wave. And those things are actually given two different types of copyrights. When you look at old vinyl, and there's a circle C and a circle P, that's actually the two different rights right there. The copyright in the music and the phonographic copyright in the actual sound waves. And so what you're doing there is you're using the underlying artistic sound, or the notes, but you're not actually using the sound waves. And the notes, that's fine. There's a way to license that and be okay with that. But using the notes, or the actual sound wave rather, that's not okay. All right, so I'm going to move on from copyright law. So what have we covered so far? There's a utility method on the method of putting this thing together. There is a utility method, or a utility patent on the method of putting this together. There's a utility patent on the corrugation of this. There is a trademark on this particular symbol. There is a design patent on this particular arch, and there's a copyright on the back for some of the arrangement of some of the words in diagrams and boxes. What else?
Do we have a patent for the general idea of not burning your hands?
I think you can. I don't know if anyone here remembers what happened before these, but what everyone was doing was just doubling up the cups. And so this was actually deemed like an eco-invention. Instead of the entire cup, all you really needed was this part of the cup. And so when this thing came out, my guess is that there's something interesting there. The whole concept of just a sleeve, no. The concept of not burning your hands when you grab something, no. But this thing of like, hey, there's a sleeve, it fits a lot of different cups, and it folds flat. It's got this curvature, it's got these angles, and there's probably something there. One of these patent numbers on the back probably covers that. What else? Yeah.
What about the exact color and the font?
The exact color. So Starbucks is starting to kind of own that color, right? You can associate coffee with that particular color. And if you just saw no text anywhere, but that green coffee bag in that Starbucks green, you might actually associate it with that coffee. I don't know if Starbucks has a trademark on that color, but there are other companies that do have trademarks on color. Corning has a trademark on pink fiberglass. There's no reason that fiberglass has to be fiberglass insulation needs to be pink, but they dye it because they want people to know that that is theirs. There's some, I've never actually smelled it or seen it, but there's supposedly thread out there, sewing thread, that are scented, like strawberries. So when you actually use it, you know that like, oh, this is that particular quality, or this is that particular brand. There's an NBC chime, ding, 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 whatever that little chime is. And you could hear it from the other room and know that like, oh, someone's watching NBC. So it doesn't actually have to be this symbol. It could be something that any of our other senses actually attribute to something. Yeah.
There could be a trade secret, if not a utility patent, on something like the corrugation or composition of the cardboard or something that the company wants to keep.
I like that. And so there's something here that talks about first ever 10% post-customer fiber cup. Where is that coming from? What is their source? That information right there could be a trade secret. It's a really important business secret, but you can't patent that. All the email addresses of all of their vendors that buy this is a trade secret. The curing temperature of this adhesive is probably a trade secret. Probably aren't filing a patent application on the curing temperature of this adhesive. Maybe you are. But my guess is that just hold it as a trade secret. There's an interesting overlap between trade secrets and utility patents. Those are the different types of intellectual property rights. We named all of them. Utility patents, design patents, trade secrets, trademark, and copyright. That's in this piece of cardboard that I'm holding in my hand.
What about plant patents?
There's not going to be any plant patents on this one.
How asexually reproduced plants, how does that work exactly?
I don't really know. I've seen one in my entire career. I was at the patent office and I got mixed up and I went to the wrong aisle and I pulled out a bunch of patents and I looked at one and it was a rose and it was like, or what I thought was a rose, and I was reading it and it was interesting. That was the first and only time I've ever seen a plant patent in my entire career. Just to give you some kind of scale, I've filed about 500 utility patents and about 5 design patents. Obviously 0 plant patents. Let's just talk about the cost structure super quick. A utility patent might be somewhere on the order of about 35 grand from beginning to end. Design patent might be somewhere on the order of about 4 grand. A trademark, about the same amounts, a couple of grand. Copyright, it's free. If you want to register that so that you could sue someone for damages, I think it's $150 or $200, something like that. Trade secret law. How much does that cost? Where do you file it? Where do you file the trade secret application?
Don't tell people.
In your NDA, legal fees associated with
legal fees associated with the NDA, maybe that. So it could be $900. Yeah.
So the cost for the patents, is that primarily the patent lawyer and the office associated?
Yes, I'd say about 90-95% of that is the patent attorney. Let's get into why do societies actually provide intellectual property rights? This is the type of question that I would ask. I'll take a volunteer for today, and you could get a bonus point for participation. Great, go ahead. To provide incentives, okay. Great. What's your name? Thanks, Corey. What are some of the benefits of actually doing this? We could see that, so we get some competition here, so maybe we get some things. What are the downsides, though? What's a cost of doing this?
Just the cost is, so if you have some like idea or product that you've made and no one else has the right to use or produce it, then they can't advance it either. So there's like a delay in when you can advance products because no one can use it.
So the media believes that, but that's not actually how patent law works. And so that that's kind of falls under this like stifling aspect. That's not actually how patent law works. The media is like pretty wrong on that side.
So in terms of cost, there's the upfront cost of actually getting a patent and the cost of defending your patent.
So from a society standpoint, sure. But I'm thinking a little bit bigger picture. Yeah.
There's the cost if you have like a unique idea or something, you're making some part of that public when you get a patent. You may still be able to protect some of it, but it may give information that you could hold otherwise secret. Like if you're filing a patent early, you may give.
I like that. I like that aspect, and I think that's definitely a clever way of like thinking about some of the costs. I want to think big picture. What is the cost to society by the fact that we actually have patents?
Well, for the society downfall, industries that could really benefit society, like medical technologies, are monopolized for the duration of the patent.
Sure. And so we're limited in actually the distribution of this thing, right? It doesn't get out there. This could be a cancer drug that's now $1 million a pop, and other people could use this thing, and it's not actually being distributed. What's your name?
Roland Hens.
Thanks. Economic incentive theory is the one that's actually thought of first when you think about intellectual property rights and why we actually do this, to encourage this creation of public goods. And public goods are something that someone else can do this, and it's really easy. It's this idea. One of the things that I want to throw out there is that in some way it's a little bit like very early on property rights. There's some cultures in this world today that don't believe in property rights, that the land itself cannot be owned by a particular person, that the land is owned by the land. And so this concept, I think, is fairly foreign to us Westerners, but I want to just throw out there this concept of we came up with the concept of property law, that this property is mine, and that other people can't come onto this property. We came up with those legal rights as a society of saying oh, this makes sense. You could build on it, you could improve on it, you could farm on it, and you're not going to do those things unless you could keep other people off. We came up with this. It's not natural. I mean, just like plopping humans on this, this earth, the concept of this land is mine, and there's a legal right behind it. We came up with that. Now, if we're going to rule by guns or something like that, that's a whole other matter. That seems very natural to me. But the whole concept that there's a legal right here, we came up with that. We also came up with this concept of intellectual property. That if you take this idea that it's mine and I protected it, then you are infringing something of mine. And so that's actually why there's this kind of tie back to property, of the intellectual property aspect of it. Most people see these things as two completely different. They view property as very tangible and intellectual property as very intangible. And these two things are completely, just not even in the same world. But in reality, when you look at the bigger spectrum, that we came up with these legal rights. This is not particularly natural. We came up with these. Then that seems to make these things look a little bit more similar. The economic incentive theory was actually the basis for when the founders came together and created the Constitution. That's actually one of my favorite little parts about patent law. When people talk about like, oh, well, there's a lot of movement right now on patent law, and what do you think? Like, are you still going to have a job in 10 years? And I kind of chuckle because like my job security stems from the Constitution of the United States. And it doesn't seem like it's going to get any better than that. Like, here it is. Congress shall have the power to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive rights to the respective writings and discoveries. This is in the Constitution. It's actually one of the reasons that we came together as states. So all the states had their own patent systems. And when a ferry boat was going down a river that separated between two states, it was infringing the patents on one side, but it was owned by the patent owner on the other side. This started to cause a lot of confusion. When we started to get a decent number of interstate commerce, moving from one state to another, and now it's infringing this patent system in Massachusetts, but not in Delaware. It started to cause some confusion. Wouldn't it be great just to have one big federal patent system? That's what they envisioned. This is one of the reasons that we came together as states. Again, I'm not too worried about job security on this one. That's enough of the history lesson. Why do we actually do this? Why do companies pursue patents?
So that they can have a little monopoly over whatever they created.
Great. So at least it's perceived monopoly, right? It's one of the reasons. What's your name?
Rita Banerjee.
Thanks, Rita. There's what, maybe 10 different ideas here? I'm going to run through them. This will be the last slide of the day. Protecting a competitive advantage. This is something that we've seen Apple do against Samsung over the last couple of months. And they're doing that fairly well. If they're able to stop the Galaxy phone from coming in, like they're going to protect their competitive advantage by pursuing and enforcing those patents. Doesn't necessarily work all too well for a startup. It doesn't work too well for a couple of different reasons. That lawsuit that Apple is in right now is probably costing them somewhere on the order of $10 to $20 million. They probably have a full-time staff of maybe 20 people, maybe more at Apple, and a staff of at least 20 or so attorneys that are working full-time on that particular infringement lawsuit. Millions of dollars, lots of years, tons of time. Startups just simply can't play that game. Patent infringement lawsuits have been called the sport of kings. Like, unless you have that kind of backing, like, you're not going to get into that particular sport. Generating licensing revenue from a non-competitor. This is something where IBM does to a great extent. Texas Instrument, those companies make $1 billion a year on licensing their technology. Let's talk about this for a second for startups. So you have a great idea, you decide just to go straight to patents. What are you going to do next? Hey everybody, if anyone wants to license this patent that I have, you could go ahead and talk to me after class. Like, what's next? You're trying to license a patent and you're a startup. Any thoughts on what you would do next?
Well, after building a portfolio, I mean, a bigger company might go after you and just acquire you.
But how do they even know about you?
Maybe do infringement of their patents.
Awesome. That's pretty good. But how do you infringe? You infringe by actually making something. What if you just wanted just to license it?
I was going to suggest you just go ahead and start selling the product once you file the application.
Yeah, it turns out that it's actually a lot easier to do a startup than it is to go out and try to find someone to license your patent. And I don't say that lightly, because this is all I do is I represent startups. I know how hard this is, and so I don't mean to say anything of just flippant. But it turns out that it is actually easier to do that. It's almost impossible to go out and try to just license technology. They want to see the demo. They want to see traction. They want to see that this thing actually works, that they can make it at scale. They want to see all of these things. And you don't have any of that. Unless you're a world-famous inventor, like you're just not going to be able to do that. That's just not an option. This used to be an option a couple decades ago. And that's kind of a weird change in society, that there used to be this profession. You would actually be able to answer it on the census. To be able to say, what do you do? I'm an inventor. What do inventors do? Well, they go out and they patent stuff and then they license other people to do this. And maybe that was okay when we're issuing, a dozen patents every week. Now we issue 3,000 to 5,000 patents every single week. And companies just don't have the time. They don't have the bandwidth to be able to actually listen to this. There is no door anymore. Inventors, welcome. Come here and talk to us. That's not how it works. If you want to license your technology, you actually create the startup, and you get traction, and then you get acquired. Yeah.
What about the Office of Technology Licensing here? Like, if you had them go out and find people who...
So what is the technology transfer licensing? What does that office look like? Have you been there?
Yes.
There's a lot of people there. And that's what they do full time. Like dozens of people sit in that office. And they're they're making phone calls and they're doing emails and they're bringing people in, and it's Stanford. And they still have a hard time doing it.
And they couldn't license Google's technology.
They actually did. They made quite a bit of money on Google.
Is it possible to sit on the patent and then wait till somebody infringes and then license it?
And then what are you going to do? You're going to knock on their door and say, hey, you infringed my patent. And like, yeah, go away, kid. They're like, no, I'm serious. I'm going to come get you. It doesn't really work. Like, there's no way of doing that anymore. And so, I mean, that's the best way to license your technology is to find an infringer. Even better is to find 2 infringers. And to be able to say, hey, look, there's 2 people in a competing space. I'm only going to license 1. Then maybe you'll get that email response. I've tried this. It's not. I speak from experience that it's not easy to get someone's attention. There's just too many patents. They just don't care. Works great for IBM. It's not going to work great for a startup. Accessing the channels or assets of a competitor. This kind of falls a little bit into, hey, I'm infringing your patents and you're infringing my patents. And this is what I'm asking of you. I want you to sell my product in your stores. Or I want you to be able to bundle this with your particular product. I want to do something here. I'm going to come up with a creative business solution to the fact that we're both infringing each other's patents. My favorite on this entire list is the next one, deterring a patent infringement lawsuit. My little story is a lunch that I had with a client a few years ago. And this client called me up. He's like, Jeff, you need to take me out to lunch. And clients don't talk to me like this. Like, when I have a great relationship with my clients, I'm typically considered kind of like a co-founder, like a strategic partner, and I never get talked to like that. So I was like, all right, you got my attention. I'll clear the schedule. Like, let's go out to lunch today or tomorrow. And we went to lunch, and he brought all the invoices of all the invoices I ever gave him. He's like, total this thing up. And I'm like, it's a lot of money. He's like, no, total it up. And I was like, all right. And I totaled it up, and it was like $137,000. And he's like, what do we have for this? I said, well, we got 2 issued patents and a couple of other patent applications that ended up being abandoned, and a couple of that are still pending, and we might get a couple more there. He's like, no, what did we get from this? I'm like, well, I just told you. And he's like, well, what value did we get from this? I'm like, well, this is really hard for me to put a value on this. Like, if your company does well and you're acquired, then maybe this stuff is worth an extra $1 million or $2 million on that valuation. But I don't know what to do. I don't know how to value this money right now, so I don't really know how to tell you. And he was really mad. And then it just dawned on me that I was like, wait a second. I'm like, remember when you started coming out with your product, And I warned you that this was infringing one of your major competitors' patents. But you saw it as a strategic risk, and you understood that, and we worked together to try to minimize that risk, to be able to say, like, this is how we're going to shut down this product line, or this is how we're going to pivot if we ever get a cease and desist and things like that. But we knew that we were actually infringing. We got on their particular radar, and they're ticked off about us. They should come up to to us like during trade shows. They're saying bad things in the press. They know about us. We know that we're infringing one of their patents. Why haven't they sued? I kind of sat there for a second. He's like, well, because when they saw that, they started pivoting and started coming towards us, and they started adopting some of the features that we had actually patented. I kind of nodded, and then he nodded, and then he smiled, and then all of a sudden we're best friends again. And he picked up lunch, and like everything was great. Because he realized that like the reason that he was still in business and that he hadn't been sued is the fact that we spent that $137,000. And that $137,000 was the best insurance policy that he could ever actually make or buy. That's my favorite little story on deterring patent infringement lawsuits. Stimulating an acquisition, we talked about this before, like best way to kind of transfer that technology is to actually be acquired, but this also helps out with valuations. Investors understand you put 35 grand in, you might get $1 million out on valuation later on. That's a really nice return on investment. And investors know that. Investors know that you can't just do this at any point. You can't do this at like the month before you're actually trying to get acquired because it's too late. Those patent rights expire. So you have to do this early on while you still have time to do this. And so they get that, and they get that concept, and they're willing to value your company a little bit higher because of that. Providing leverage in a negotiation with a partner. I had a client about a year and a half ago. Maybe it was more like 2 years ago now. We filed 8 provisional applications before they signed a joint development agreement. One day before that joint development agreement was signed. It was a very, very large company, like top Fortune 10 type of company. Later on, there was a spin-out of that technology. And my client was going to be given 3% of ownership of that. And they felt like that was just absolutely wrong, that they wanted something much, much higher than that. You know, at least 20% of what they were bringing to the table. And I had asked for, I knew the CEO was really upset about this, and I had asked for what's the roadmap for this particular spin-out. And they shared it with me, and I was like, well, these things right here infringe 3 out of those 8 patents that we filed. And those 8 patents were considered background technology, things that we don't share. Joint development agreements, you share everything that you do, that you come up together, that you come up with moving forward. You typically share that. So they had every right to do that, particular things that they came up with before or during that joint development. But we had those rights that we filed the day before that joint development agreement. And I reminded them of that. I reminded their corporate counsel and their IP counsel of that. That number moved from 3% ownership to 30% ownership of that particular startup. And that was simply because we had filed those, and now we had more leverage in that negotiation. Preventing the others from patenting the technology. This is a really poor reason, but large companies still do this. Especially if you're doing a great volume and you're not paying a heck of a lot of money, great. If you're going to file 1,000 or 2,000 patents, there's probably 500 of those that you're doing it for this particular reason. Or you're trying to do it for Wall Street. Hey, we're a technology company. Look how many patents that we filed. And so that's another reason that like big companies file patents, even though a lot of those patents, a significant majority of those patents are very, very narrow. Other things of just like, hey, we're a technology company. And it does give a nice signal, especially if you're a startup. If you're pitching a VC and you're selling, hey, this is the technology that we've created. This is brand new. No one's ever thought about this before. It's going to solve these particular features. Like the story that you're telling is like very technical. If you don't end that story with, and we filed a couple patents on this, it's going to be scratching, the investors will say, like, what's going on? Like, why didn't you do that? Maybe this isn't as great of a technology as you thought it was. So this is a terrific signal. This kind of goes back to stimulating an investment or an acquisition. kind of also goes into play of kind of this increasing credibility. Of just like, hey, we have patents on this. These are typically the reasons that you would actually go ahead and pursue patents. Does anyone have any questions on this stuff? Yeah.
Regarding your third point, accessing competitor assets, could you ever try and leverage trade secrets out of a competitor by trying to take them to court over a patent infringement?
Sure. So I mean, there was a great trade secret lawsuit, McLaren and Ferrari a couple of years ago. One of, I don't remember which one, got a hold of all of the secrets. Yep. And so they've got into a pretty nasty lawsuit over that particular trade secrets. There's some really fun, sexy trade secret, lawsuits where people had swooped into a business and like broke in and grabbed some things and took out. But usually it's really boring stuff like a fired employee, right before they left, they put a thumb drive in and they downloaded all the secrets and then they walked across the street and gave it to one of their competitors. It's usually something really boring like that. Yeah.
Are there situations where you would have a technology that you created that you're going to use that you wouldn't want to patent? Are there situations like that?
Sure. So there may be a manufacturing technique that no one else is ever going to figure out. Or maybe you came up with a way to make cola in a way that is fairly cheap and kind of has this great taste, and you want to keep that a trade secret for the next 114 years. Coca-Cola. And if they would have patented that formula, which they probably could have, that would have been long gone by now, long expired. So there are definitely times, especially when things are true secrets. No one's going to figure this out. Yeah.
It's maybe a question you might not be able to answer, but what was the rationale behind setting these time sets? Say, this patent is good only for so long. Why not say for as long as the United States of America exists?
Sure. I mean, that's basically copyright law. Copyright law used to be like 20 years, and now it's 100 years, and it's even more than that. And when Mickey Mouse is about to get onto, off of copyright, Disney will lobby Congress again and get that extended. So essentially, copyright law is forever. I mean, it's just a ridiculous amount of time. It's not like, where's my book? It's not like I wrote this book because copyright protection that my son's kids are going to be able to benefit from. That, I mean, first, they're not going to benefit from that. This isn't doing that well. But there's no reason for me to create something because of like 5 generations down the road. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. And so the copyright law could be 20 years. And I think pretty much everything would still be made. Patents now, at 20 years from filing, is pretty long. It's not for pharmaceuticals. It may not even be long enough for some pharmaceuticals. But for other things like software, it seems ridiculously long. Those were at that, just kind of established at some point in history.
And so there's no lobbying, for example, by, I mean, for them it was pretty detrimental, right? But after 20 years the aspirin or whatever it's called, it's went out and everyone started making it.
Sure. So, I mean, that's right. Pharmaceuticals understand this down to the day, right? Because they're making millions of dollars on a daily basis from their drugs, and say that they understand this completely. But there's no easy way, and we'll learn this throughout the quarter. There's no easy way for us to be able to say that's a pharmaceutical. It seems so simple that we should be able to do that, but when you start looking at claims, it doesn't quite look like that. We'll explore that a little bit more of that next week. All right, without any questions, I'll see you guys next week.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.